Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, he was conscientious, committed to peace, and momentarily praised. His laurels burned in the bombings, his valorous and vain efforts had but hastened upon his people. Yet in eulogizing this English worthy, Sir Winston Churchill, an ardent opponent of the deceased policy of appeasement, unexpectedly struck a conciliatory chord toward the late Neville Chamberlain. Quote, "It is not given to human beings happily for them, for otherwise life would be intolerable, to foresee or to predict to any large extent the unfolding course of events. In one phase men seem to have been right, in another they seem to have been wrong. Then again, a few years later, when the perspective of time is lengthened, all stands in a different setting. There is a new proportion, there is another scale of values. History with its flickering lamp stumbles along the trail of the past, trying to reconstruct its scenes, to revive its echoes, and kindle with pale gleams the passion of former days. What is the worth of all this? The only guide to a man is his conscience. The only shield to his memory is the rectitude and sincerity of his actions. It is very imprudent to walk through life without this shield, because we are so often mocked by the failure of our hopes and the upsetting of our calculations. But with this shield, however the fates may play, we march always in the ranks of honor." End quote. Mr. Speaker, while not serving in this chamber during the debates on the resolution authorizing the President of the United States to use martial force to remove Iraq's Ba'athist regime for numerous just causes, including its refusal to honor its Gulf War ceasefire and United Nations resolutions, during my time as a temporary custodian of my constituent's office, I have striven to ensure our nation's victory in the battles for Iraq, Afghanistan, and in the overarching war on terror. In doing so for 3 years, I have 4 times traveled to Iraq and once to Afghanistan to meet with our troops, visited wounded citizen soldiers, eulogized our fallen, and consoled their grieving families. As a witness to their courage, sacrifice, and suffering, I have been morally compelled to support every appropriation for our military and civilian personnel in harm's way, oppose every policy injurious to our country's common cause of victory, advance my own ideas on how to secure our victory, including the introduction of bipartisan, though ultimately unaccepted legislation to establish concerted congressional oversight over the course of this conflict, and refused to condone a resolution by my Republican peers which failed to meet its duty, and immediately afterwards introduced a resolution of my own in order to fulfill my duty to our soldiers, my constituents, and our country. As a staunch supporter of our nation's mission in Iraq, Afghanistan, and throughout the world, I did so in the belief it is morally imperative for every sovereign American citizen and their congressional servants to ensure our valiant troops victoriously come home to their loved one arms. Were I to do otherwise and lapse in my moral duty, I would not only be violating our troops and my constituents' trusts, I would be violating the dictates of my conscience. It is equally true, of course, how within this House other members' dictates of conscience have led them to a decidedly different, though equally constant, course of action. To these members and their fellow citizens who have done so to date, I share the sentiments Sir Winston held for Neville Chamberlain. You are an American worthy, who, however the fates may play, will march always in the ranks of honor. Yet because the resolution thrust before us is a craven exposition of political expediency in a time of national crisis, today many may stray from the ranks of honor. This resolution is non-binding, which means the resolution has no force of law to compel future legislative acts in compliance with its dictates. In sum, then, this resolution legally changes nothing. Americans' money will still unabatedly facilitate our troops' continued deployment into harm's way, despite the United States Congress collectively condemning the President's announced troop reinforcement plan. This impotent resolution is injurious in the eyes of its opponents because it will undermine the morale of our troops, their families, and our fellow citizens, even as it heartens and emboldens our enemies. And this impotent resolution is injurious because it will not stop what many of its supporters purport will be a loss of life and a lost cause. By neither stopping the war nor speeding our victory, and by calculatedly doing nothing in this time of national crisis, this resolution is immoral. This immorality is manifest in how the resolution guilefully attempts to insinuate the United States Congress can simultaneously support our troops and oppose their mission. During a time of war, if an act is not in our national interest, such as the President's plan is deemed to be in this resolution, the act is injurious to the national interest. At best, the act will expend resources or most tragically claim lives without furthering the cause of victory. Better than anyone, our troops understand this. Therefore, this Congress does not support our troops when it proclaims they are risking their lives in a doomed mission injurious to America. Yet, if Congress persists in this insanity, the members must meet their responsibility to enumerate the reasons they disapprove of the President's plan and, in point of fact, the mission upon which our troops have already embarked. But this resolution does not provide any rationale for its conclusion. Thus, rather than deserving our collective concurrence, this resolution deserves our universal condemnation. To this, some supporters will object and allege two defenses for this resolution's fatal omission. Do not these supporters' floor remarks prove the rationale sufficient to sustain this resolution? No. If floor remarks alone are sufficient to sustain the resolution's conclusion, then floor remarks alone will be sufficient to derogate the President's plan and ergo vitiate any necessity for a written resolution. Conversely, if it is imperative for the plan's detractors to express their opposition in a written resolution, it is also imperative to express their reasons in writing. Alas, such logic pales before some members' impulsive muse of the moment. Let us then move to some of the resolution supporters' second, far more distressing defense. A vote of disapproval on the President's plan will set the stage for additional Iraq legislation, which will be coming to the House floor. As no one who participated in the crafting of this covert legislative agenda has deigned to inform the American people as to its aims, one wonders if it will cut off funding for our troops in harm's way or cut off critical reconstruction funding in the supplemental appropriations bill, thus toppling an unheralded but essential pillar of the President's new victory strategy and proving the perspicacity of the present resolution. While we wonder and worry, according to newspaper reports, there is a strategy to make this rumored legislative plan palatable to the public. This strategy's tactics, which its instigators are more than happy to relate to the media, are reputed to include a coordinated multi-million-dollar TV campaign by leftist special interest pressure groups. No doubt somewhere beyond this ephemeral stream of time there lurks a jealous Clement Vallandigham. But in fairness, let us disdain a priori speculation and instead examine a previous resolution to glean the potentialities of the present resolution supporters' secret legislative plan. The following passages are excerpted from a previous resolution which, albeit more forthrightly, also opposes the Commander-in-Chief's decisions. Quote, resolved that this convention does explicitly declare as the sense of the American people that after 4 years of failure by the experiment of war, during which, under the pretense of a military necessity of war power higher than the Constitution itself has been disregarded in every part, and public liberty and private right alike trodden down, and the material prosperity of the country essentially impaired, justice, humanity, liberty, and the public welfare demand that immediate efforts be made for cessation of hostilities. To that end, at the earliest practical moment, peace may be restored. End quote. This previous resolution, too, expresses its support for our troops in harm's way. Quote, resolved that the sympathy of the Democratic Party is heartily and earnestly extended to the soldiery of our Army and sailors of our Navy, who are and have been in the field and on the sea under the flag of our country. And in the event of its attaining power, they will receive all the care, protection, and regard that brave soldiers and sailors of the Republic have so nobly earned. End quote. This previous resolution is the Democratic Party platform of 1864. If the past is prologue, let us be firm in a fair request. If the resolution's supporters possess a victory strategy or otherwise for Iraq, these public servants must immediately reveal it to the sovereign citizens of the United States. If these self-strategists refuse, they will incur the American people's inference. This legislative plan assumes and will hasten our nation's defeat in Iraq. How else could one explain these individuals already having a legislative plan and an accompanying media plan premised upon our troop reinforcement's failure, and doing so regardless of potential American victories on the ground or the advice of our military commanders? Perhaps while they demur from revealing it, these anonymous commanders-in-chief will dubiously coin their legislative plan and exit strategy. It is an irrelevant distinction. Right now, the enemy is actively seeking to murder more American and Iraqi soldiers and civilians. So right now and for the immediate future, an exit from Iraq is a defeat in Iraq. Whatever one pretends to the contrary, one will never convince our enemies otherwise. Yes, it is all too human to wish the world were different. All too human to rationalize away one's misguided actions. Being composed of frail, fallible human beings, even great assemblies such as this have succumbed to the temptation. We must not. Writing well before Churchill's magnanimous eulogy of Chamberlain, and to the contrary, warning the British people's representatives of how history was pitiless, George Dangerfield coldly assessed his national leader's mismanagement of state affairs during the pre-Great War.